we are very happy to provide a lot more context on these principles. If you're curious, we have a guidebook freely available to download. But the big point here is we use principles rather than prescription. And that's going to be one of the themes of this session is we bring all of our own expertise, but we're not experts in everything. And so the way that we want to help people prioritize and make decisions is in how they align with the healthy soil principles. And so people have a lot of reasons for doing what they do. It can be cultural, it can be a financial constraint, it can be lack of knowledge, lack of resources, right? And aligning or not aligning with the principles takes away the judgment, right? It's like, we don't care why you are or not keeping your soil covered. All we want to know is, let's see if we want to move the needle from unhealthy towards healthy. If we align with more of these healthy soil principles, we're likely to start moving that needle. So all of our planning process is really rooted in this non-prescriptive principle and process approach. Next slide. So I'm giving this overview for this session, and we'll sort of go more quickly through this in subsequent of the 4 webinars. But so I'm going to sort of start at the back, use sort of backward design. The outcome of soil health planning is a plan, right? There's some sort of written document that helps people have a guide post and know what they're going after and how they're going to do it. And so the plan can include these following components. Often you want a values statement or a mission or goals so that you know where you're going. You want to know when you're doing it. You want to know who is doing it. So you want to know who is communicating with who. You want to know who can who needs to be in the room to make a decision so that we're not creating more strife than there needs to be. There's often a spatial component, right? So we have a temporal component. We also have a spatial component. And then in this plan, we also need to have a social component. So who are the experts in the region? Who are the people to go and talk to when you get stuck? Because the best laid plans, we all know we get stuck. So who else is out there? What other resources are available to help you meet your goals? The plan also includes an evaluation framework. How do you know you're actually heading towards your goals if you're not thinking and evaluating? And that evaluation framework also helps people to make adaptive management decisions. So if the best laid plans, again, you go out, you look at your soil, and it's actually not in better shape than it was the year before, let's think about it. Let's think of how to adapt that. So there has to be some evaluation to know if you're meeting your goals. And then finally, there's the context and background. And we sort of intentionally put this at the bottom because we want the plan to be useful to the person who's on the ground. Mostly, those people already know the context and background, and they don't need that up front and to flip through dozens of pages before they get to the like, what was I supposed to do this month? There it is. There's that calendared work plan. So we put the context and background at the bottom. And that's not to say it's less important. It's just for a slightly different audience. And I think I have that on another slide. I don't, so I will say it now. Yeah, so the context and background could be for if you're bringing on a new person and you want to get them up to speed on what you've been doing and where you're going, having this plan, this actual physical document that you can hand over, go, if you read through this, you'll know what we've been doing lately and what the context and background of this ranch is. So this document is the end point of the planning process. Next slide. But that document, while it's important and we want it to be really useful, is the result of a process, and the process is planning. And so we use this terminology. Planners are the sort of technical service providers or supporters And we actually specifically chose not to say clients, because we really believe that this is a partnership. Both parties have to be invested in a partnership in this process of planning. So when you see plan partners, if you're sort of used to the client or the producer mindset, that's great. But that's what we mean by plan partners. And so it's this process that these two groups engage in to dedicate time and attention to collect the information, really deeply reflect, and find a vision, and then lay out the steps to reach that vision. And so, and I put these next to each other on the slide on purpose, because the planning process usually starts with a past or present focus. So we're getting the context and background first, and then we're using that information to develop our future focus. And so you can kind of see when we look at the final document, that's in the exact opposite order of how we actually do the process. So I just want to draw your attention to that we're not going to go into a ton more detail, especially in this session, on the actual written plan, but I just wanted to draw your attention to how the planning process and the plan relate to each other, and actually in some cases are sort of a switched order. You don't sit down and write a plan from start to finish. The process is a little less linear than the final plan. Thanks. Next. All right, so when you registered, you got access to our cutting edge document. This is a shout out to say feedback is very welcome. You will notice it has not been copy edited. It has not been final formatted. You are getting an advanced copy. We hope it's helpful, and we also very much welcome feedback. If you're using it, if something's unclear, let us know. We would love to work with you all and make this usable for everyone who's interested in soil health planning. So broadly, there's some stages that we outline in the book. We've got some things that we're not going to cover in this webinar, but that are really important. Like, if you want to do soil health planning, there's some things that you need to think about. You need to think about how you're going to store the data. You think about how you're going to market yourself. Think about who you're going to work with, who matches your goals and your expertise. So how are you going to select people where that partnership is going to be successful? So that's sort of that first far left box up there. Next, we have this middle box, onboarding, discover the context, the social context, discover ecological context, discover financial context. That's a sort of past and present focused portion, right? We're taking a snapshot, we're seeing where we've come and understanding how we got to where we are right now, because that can tell us a lot about what's possible for how we go forward. So we're doing all of this sort of backward facing information gathering in that middle section. And then we have this pathfinding section. That's this time where we're really looking forward, and we're trying to figure out, based on who we are, what we have, what we got, what can we do go forward? How can that be realistic? How can we actually implement changes on the ground? And so again, reiterating that that sort of past focused and that future focused together is what goes into the plan. And so that's sort of a different step. Again, there's this process, and then there's the document. And then of course, an important part of the planning process is to actually implement. We're also not going to talk too much about that. But as I mentioned, there's this adaptive management part of that. Next. And so I think one thing that we're really going to emphasize over this webinar series is a couple of key skills that we found is really important for different parts of this planning process, right? So listening, trust building, facilitation, technical experience, the ability to network well. All of these are, often considered more soft skills, but are absolutely important for having someone share with you sort of the truth of what's going on, so that you can really make a difference and help them make a realistic plan. If people are just telling you what they think you want to hear, then it's not going to be it's not going to help them move forward. So I think, let's see, where's my slide? For this session, we're really going to focus on this idea of listening and this idea of setting expectations as ways of, as we demonstrated even in this webinar, setting the container for how the partnership and the interaction around the planning process can go. Next slide. All right, so hopefully anticipating a couple of people's questions, how does our framework relate to other technical service or other technical support? First, and I think this is of interest to a lot of folks, we consider this very similar to carbon planning, right? Considering the soil's function around organic material is sort of the direct link between carbon planning and soil health, right? We could think about soil health a little bit more narrowly as how do we increase organic material and that long-term carbon storage. And so in that way, soil health is a bigger concept than the narrow focus on carbon. In other ways, the focus on soil health may miss aspects of carbon planning, such as, you know, the fuel used to run the machinery. That's not directly incorporated into our planning process or evaluation. But again, it could be scaled. The process could be scaled out to really focus just on carbon. We also consider ourselves slightly broader than an NRCS sort of agency plan, and partly because as a nonprofit, we're not tied to a resource concern. We're not saying it's not important. It's just a slightly different framework that we're approaching. We just want to be aware of how we're moving the needle towards healthy soil rather than matching to a specific resource concern. And I hope I'm emphasizing that there is nothing wrong with any other framework of planning. This is our approach, and we want people to use what's the most beneficial from whichever framework they're using. So we want to offer another tool in your toolbox and use whatever tool works best for the job. Great. And then, of course, there's lots of other kinds of planning services. You can decide what other tools you want to put in your toolbox. Thanks. All right, I know that was it for me. Whew. Back to Catherine.
You did great. That was the overview, and hopefully everybody's kind of finding their way and seeing that document that we've provided, the advanced copy, as kind of a resource to check out and look at your own you know, your own current planning practice and how some of these things might help you. So what I'm going to do is kind of switch us a little bit to kind of a storytelling of what this was like. I'm very fortunate to have had this experience now with multiple plan partners, and I just want to tell you the story of kind of one of these site assessments, which is kind of it is definitely our first in-person on the land meeting with a plan partner. So let's go for a drive. It's May 11th in 2022. I've been evacuated, and I'm staying at the Quivira office in Santa Fe with my 4.5-pound Chihuahua Tonto. The Hermit's Peak Cap Canyon fire has been burning since April 6th. Our new plan partner, Don King, has a 100-acre forage field project in the Estancia Basin. And Don is a next generation farmer. When I say that, he's taking on from where his family's been for many generations, and he was very succinct in his written goal to say that his goal, and I'm quoting him, is our goals are to increase profitability while implementing holistic and regenerative practices that create multiple ecological, social, and economical impacts locally and beyond. Well, you sure can't argue with a goal like that. So I take the route down 285 and I got to turn off there at 41. And I realize I forgot my hat for this field day. So I turn into the store, and I don't know if you can see me here, but this is the exact hat that I bought there. It's my little lavender. Now it's my good luck work field hat. And I'm going to take this drive, which I've taken before on 41 through the Galisteo Basin and in the Estancia Basin. So I start driving through some of my favorite country. For those of you that may be coming from other areas, I saw we had some people here from South France and other places. This is kind of a proximity map that I pulled down from a regional water plan of kind of the location of the Estancia Basin, which is pretty central to New Mexico. And I also really liked this 3-part map of kind of a geological, it's definitely a geological perspective of how this basin came into being. It was definitely a large lake through different past periods that over many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years turned into this fertile valley of grasslands and playas and dunes. And so it's just kind of interesting to realize that what we think of as grasslands now was actually in geologic time created for us by these large, as a large lake that eventually dried out. This is what I drove up on. This is May. We've been in a D4 drought for a couple of years.
I think we need to advance the slide.
Oh yeah, sorry. Did we advance to the maps? So now we're going to advance the slide to the site. Yes, there we are. Thank you. This basin, as I was driving through it, it was very dry, very dusty. I didn't see any livestock until I got closer to Dawn's project. I roll up on it, and it's this 100-acre field, and the idea of the project is to grow forage in it because it has irrigation, and this is one of the strategies that the USDA and FSA has been promoting in response to drought, is to do some type of forage plot or growing forage that you could take your herd out to feed them during gaps in rain and not having forage available in your pastures. So not really necessarily for mowing or cutting or baling or transport. It's actually there to bring the animals onto to eat and to actually help offset hay cost. And this is kind of one part in several parts that Dawn is up to. Next slide. So what do you see here? This looks sexy to me. In all this dry, flat, sparsely vegetated basin, I see some really good infrastructure. I've seen really good fences with no livestock in them, but here I've got an electrical pole, I've got a wellhead, and I've got a big pipe for water. And that is going to help with this project. Then if you go to the next slide. I'm seeing a little more infrastructure. This is a large valve that can be used to open up to flood irrigate portions of the field. And of course, I see a dry cow patty. It's a mineralized soil. It's a little bit of green right there. And all of this is going on this visit. As I'm seeing this, I'm just observing, and I'm kind of making a mental movie to go along with what Dawn's talking to me about. He's telling me about this well. He's telling me about these valves. He's in charge of showing me his project. He's showing myself and another cohort from Quivira what his place looks like and what he thinks, what he has put thought to make this part of a response to where things are right now. Dawn I'm just listening. Dawn shares with me that they themselves have destocked. The only cows, livestock I saw on the way out there were about 30 to 40 red Angus, and those were what they have left at this point. And many of their neighbors had moved the animals or completely destocked out of the Estancia Basin, at least in May of 2022. Next slide, please. So after we looked at the forage project, and Don's still in the driver's seat, and he says, hey, let's go up and look at this other land that we have. It wasn't very far away. We followed him up there, and he drove us up to some quarter sections of land that were at a slightly higher elevation that had more vegetative cover. You see grass, cholla, some evergreen shrubs, and also off in the distance, you can see the clouds building for another pyrocumulus cloud back in the mountains that I had been evacuated from. So it was very good to be hearing from him that they had this other quarter section, and that these areas could also be used to feed their animals when they greened up, when the monsoon rains came. And so the pieces started falling together in my mind, based on what I was hearing, which number one is you can bring the herd through the forage field in the dry spring and in the driest part of the year. And number two, we can take the herd out to the pastures after the monsoon greens them up for us. And last slide, please. So we see another pasture, more grass and vegetative cover, way more than what I saw along Highway 41 as I was driving through there. And, I'm starting to kind of see what Don has shared and how the different pieces are going to flow together to create a grazing system, planned grazing with a planned forage system, to be able to start mitigating for drought. Now, I haven't seen this any other place in the Estancia Basin, and I remember thinking that and asking Don if he had seen anybody else growing forage plots back then, anyway, in May of 2022, and we hadn't seen any of that. So I was aware of that as somebody in this community, from this community, that this was part of a response that he would, of his vision, of his next generation vision. So I learn a lot as the listener to what our plan partners are sharing as I'm listening to them. And I'm very fortunate. You can just go to, you can end that slideshow and just go to a screen. Very fortunate today to have Don here with us in the audience. And I asked him to come and to share as the plan partner, what was it like for him, to be sharing his project. So I'd like to introduce Don King from out Estancia Way. And
well, I think we just got into afternoon, so good afternoon, everybody. If you're in the Mountain Standard Time Zone. Yeah, Catherine, it was great meeting Catherine, and thank you for, spending the time. And I felt pretty comfortable sharing with Catherine because she has quite a great history, and she's seen a lot of ranches and a lot of ranches out in the desert. So I felt pretty comfortable sharing, and not to because it was a very dry time back in May, and so bringing people out and showing them a dry pasture, can make you feel a little vulnerable. So I wanted to thank her for being open and just seeing what we see and the potential thereof. So she provided a great introduction when we got out there, and very respectful to the land and the people that came before us. And so that really kind of set the tone for everything, and I really appreciated that. One of the questions was, did I feel listened to? I did feel listened to. It's kind of a challenge, kind of going against the grain of how we've done it for a long time, conventionally, and being a younger generation, you don't always get, sometimes you get funny looks when you introduce new ideas because of the way it's always been done. So it was good to feel like somebody was in our corner, and we can feel kind of isolated. We're ranchers, we're out on the land a lot of times by ourselves. So sometimes when we get these ideas and trying to do things differently, feel kind of isolated because nobody else is doing it. So I felt really, really good about being heard and listened to, and Catherine was very open with our ideas. And I did feel like I was in the driver's seat because she followed me around wherever we wanted to go. So I did feel like I was in the driver's seat and just getting feedback and a different perspective or different ideas, or just digging from her experience and her knowledge, because like I said, she has seen a lot of ranches and a lot of country.
I was curious, Dawn, I remember talking to you about this just right before when we were in the tech check, but I just really thought your project was, for me, with that fire going on and being evacuated, it was such a hopeful, right in the middle of the D4 drought and all the dryness, it was such a hopeful visit to hear your vision for the future. You weren't just going to wait for it to rain. You were going to feed your animals with what you had.
Right.
We talk about doing what you can where you're at with what you got. And I thought you stitched that together pretty good.
Right. And, we're kind of used to that as ranchers. we sometimes we get in the habit of flying by the seat of our pants day to day, and we know what we got to get done that day. But that's why I think these tools are really good and help with planning and taking the right steps to get the vision and getting towards your goal, because we do get kind of caught up with the day to day and flying by the seat of our pants. And I think it's going to be a great tool for us and everybody here, like Amy said, having another tool in the toolbox and applying it properly. So I think this is great.
Well, I appreciate you so much coming to this. I know you're super busy and sharing kind of from your side. Is there anything that you want to add before we kind of go into this skill set of the active listening it takes for us to be able to really be inspired by plans and visions like what you've made?
Yeah, I mean, just mostly, if you're a farmer, rancher, you know, like you're not alone, you know, we're all here, and we may have a lot of space in between us, but it's good to reach out. And when I applied for this program, you know, I wasn't really expecting to get, and it just felt really good that there's people out there that really do want to support you and want to take things in the positive directions, and that will step out and put their energy towards the collective and for each other. So I really appreciate Catherine and everybody at Quivira for putting themselves out there for the greater good. And you know, we've, as farmers and ranchers, sometimes we feel like we get left out and unappreciated. So
Well,
I everybody.
I'm really hoping to see you at one of those barn dances at the Regenerate conference.
That's right.
Uh,
That music and back on the Zoom where
Thank you so much. That
yeah,
just added it. Thank you.
thank you. Good to talk for everybody. Thank you, Catherine.
So we're going to go from here into a little overview of these skills. And you know, this I'm going to just turn this over to Eva, but this happens because of these practices.
Yeah, thanks. So I put in the chat, and just want to really emphasize this. It's certainly helpful to have knowledge and background, but I mean, I see lots of folks from visually, perhaps, different stages in life. We want people who are new. We want people who are experienced. We want people to be able to plan on their own operation. We want people to be able to help their neighbors and friends. Catherine and I often talk about how quickly we can work ourselves out of a job by having other people doing this work. And so we're not going to be experts in everything, but there are effective tools to help us get information to help people make the best decisions for them. And so one key skill is active listening, highlighting that where you can find this in that document that we provided. Next slide. And it's crazy because listening seems so easy, but to really truly feel listened to, I think, is one of the greatest gifts you can receive, is when someone really is listening and paying attention to you. And so as a consequence, it's one of the greatest gifts you can give to another person, and can help you and them make better decisions. And it takes practice. So if you're not used to this, if this feels brand new, I'm not kidding. I'm trained as a scientist. I have had lots of training in communication because it does not come naturally to me. I don't know if that resonates with anyone else on this call. So I've literally had to practice, and there are things to practice. So I literally have practiced saying the phrases, "What do you notice about this landscape?" Right? Like, I've literally practiced the phrase, "How could you learn more about the water system on your own land?" Right? And so these open-ended questions and practicing how to frame a question so that you don't just get a yes or no answer can show engagement, and can help deepen and broaden the information that someone is willing to share. And so hopefully you saw some examples of that even in the Mentimeter we did. We asked people to describe themselves with their own words, right? So that's this example of how to how to have it the producer, the plan partner in the driver's seat, and practice making these really open-ended questions. You may at another stage, you know, you've driven home from the site visit, you're writing up your notes, you may have a form, and we've got some example documents in the appendix of, you know, do they have a water system, yes or no? Okay, great. At a later stage in the process, you can get to some of these, you know, yes or no answers. You know, how many cows do they have, right? Okay, they've got 80 cows, right? But you don't need to ask that in that way when you're on site with someone, when you're building trust. You can be more open, you can be more expansive, and invite them to share what they want to share on the time scale that they feel comfortable sharing it. So open-ended questions is one tool to practice, and it doesn't come naturally to all of us. The second really useful tool, say it here on acknowledge, is, and maybe raise your hand, I'm going to ask a couple of things. How many times have you been talking to someone and you can just see in their eyes that they are waiting for you to stop so they can say whatever they want to say? Raise your hand. Perhaps, right? That is common. I've once heard that to write realistic dialogue in a movie, that's how you do. You say person A says something, person B says something, person A answers themselves, person B answers themselves, and that sounds very realistic, right? That doesn't feel of service to someone, right? To a plan partner that we're building trust with. On the other hand, how many times have you told someone a story and someone said something like, oh man, well, that's nothing. My cousin had 2 wildfires on his property. How does that feel when it happens to you? Probably not, that you don't feel heard, right? You maybe feel judged, you maybe feel diminished, you certainly don't feel heard. You're not building trust. A less sort of sinister side of that is somebody says something and, hey, that's right in my expertise, I know exactly what you should do. Hey, I know a guy, he can repair your pump in 2 seconds. Like, no problem, that's no problem. Are you really listening to the person? Are you listening to what's underneath that worry? Are you listening to why they care about that? If you're only going to problem solve, you're not actually getting all of the information to find the best solution. And the last one that is maybe feels good at the time is, let's say you just talk to your friend and you're like, man, I'm having such a hard time at work, I don't know if I'm good enough. And they cheerlead. They go, absolutely, you're good enough. You're the best person at this, and you think about this and all this stuff. That cheerleading maybe cheers you up, but it's really not listening. It's cheerleading. And unfortunately, the opposite of cheerleading is judgment, right? That's part of that same scope of how people are responding, right? You can judge in a good way and you can be judgmental in a bad way. All of those are judgment. And that's not truly listening. That's not as trust building as we may want. Oh, thank you. Yes, bring up Brene Brown. Double, triple snaps. Yeah, great. A lot of these skills, there are lots of places to find these skills. However, for this session, there are a couple of things you can practice. So, Don just shared. And so we might respond and saying like, wow, for you, it was really interesting to have someone follow you around, right? That's keeping him in the driver's seat in our response. Or it sounds like it's been really hard to be spatially separated from other people, right? We're not judging. All we're doing is acknowledging what was said and the person is feeling heard. So these two tools to practice, you can actually just practice these phrases as a script. You can practice them in your everyday relationships. They're really useful skills. The other piece as a skill, I should probably put it as number 3 because it feels like a useful skill, is to really pay attention to body language and tone of voice. right? You can get a lot of information beyond just what was said. So if somebody, you know, is like, yeah, my family gets along really well. Like, where do you think the truth lies? Does it lie with the words, or does it lie probably closer to the body language? So you may not say anything in that moment, but if you're noticing that, you are actually getting more and deeper information by using these tools, asking open-ended questions, acknowledging, and then noticing the body language and tone of the voice, which can give you some indications of maybe the feelings behind the words. Yeah, because we want things to be realistic, we need to acknowledge the context of what is happening now in order to move forward. Sometimes that context is pain. Sometimes that context is insecurity. We need to know it, and we can still move forward. Hopefully those are 3 useful tools that you can practice. Next slide. The other key skill that we want to introduce is setting expectations. So for example, in this webinar, you received some communication ahead of time. You received resources that you could read through before you come. You have some idea of the kinds of things you're going to learn and do. In the opening, we had some working agreements, right? We said, this is Zoom etiquette. We wanted to set expectations. We wanted to set the tone of how we're going to have this interaction. Catherine used the term, it's a container, right? So setting expectations. Again, there's lots of workbook sections to investigate. Next slide. One way to think about working agreements are just sort of paying attention to the ways we're going to work together. How do we want to interact in a partnership? So as I just mentioned, you can make this container during a session. So for example, you know, you saw some on those initial slides. Here's another set of examples. Speak from your own experience, amplify value, commit to learning, things like that. And then at a broader scale, you can also do this through more formal documentation, right? So especially if there's an exchange of money or some other of that sort of more formalized value, you're probably going to want at the minimum a written memorandum of understanding that people sign off on, or a contract, and certainly go consult a lawyer if you're going to go either of those routes. So that there's some formal documentation of what this process looks like, how long it's going to take, how frequently you need to be in contact, what you need, like how do you break this relationship? If it's not working, what are the steps to actually end this thoughtfully and meaningfully and mindfully? So there's this sort of formal idea of this documentation of the plan process, and we give an example in the appendix. And then the other thing is documentation and thinking about how you want to set expectations for the process itself. So for example, you may want to help facilitate people to make a decision-making plan. Really know where does the buck stop? Who can veto a decision? That's really useful to know before you make an elaborate plan where you're going to fulfill all of your hopes and dreams. You need to know which person can say, we're not doing that, right? That could be a financial decision, that could be a social construct. We need to know that, and everyone in the process needs to know that. So setting that expectation, setting those working agreements. So there's the decision-making plan, and then there's just more the communication plan. And anyone raise their hand if that's the hardest part of your job, your family, your relationship. Communication is really hard. Even with the best laid plans, things are still going to get, get difficult. But for example, if the planner knows that the plan partner always goes out of town in August, then they won't try to call, they won't try to email, they will understand that. So even having some of these basic understandings of the annual cycle and how to work together can be extremely helpful. And so together, yeah, this is the first session of this 4-part series. We wanted to set up trust building and setting expectations. we used the site visit, which hopefully feels fairly intuitive of why people would want to do a site visit in a planning process. We didn't go deeply into that, but that is this really intense time to build trust and set expectations. It's this moment when people are on the ground together, learning together, and there are some really concrete practices that you as a planner can do to make that be as effective as possible. And in just a little bit, we're going to practice that. Back to you all.
Thank you. I think what we'd like to do is that's kind of the it'd be good to work together. So moving into that part, there's a couple of questions that we'd like you to respond to on Mentimeter about this first session. So that slide is up, and we invite you to go to the